back. Stanley Kurtz. The suburbs, the target of the Democrats, and by target I mean the target for destruction. And the Democrats have kind of showed some ankle, but are now kind of covering it up as Biden wants to get as many votes out of the suburbs, particularly that ring the major cities in this country as possible, because he views that as the way to victory. Now, Stanley Kurtz, give us the full foundation of what it is that Obama Biden were trying to do.
Absolutely, Mark. Well, you remember before I mentioned that any locality that applies for a federal housing grant is going to have to fill out an elaborate demographic form. You got to explain where everyone lives in your jurisdiction, by income, by race, by ethnicity, etc., etc. That's just the beginning. Once you've done that, you have to compare your suburbs' demography to the demography of the greater metropolitan region. So again, if you're in Montgomery County or Chester County in suburban Philadelphia, you have to then compare your demography to the demography of the greater Philadelphia region. And if there are any imbalances, if there are different races, ethnicities, or incomes in different parts of the region, you have to submit a plan to HUD to remedy that imbalance. And what that means in practice is that if you're an upper middle class suburb, you might be obligated to build tens, even hundreds of millions of dollars in what's called high density, low income housing, and change your zoning regulations if your zoning had allowed only for single family residences, a house with a nice yard where your kids can play and plenty of parking on the street. That would have to change. And even that is just the beginning, because you then have to inventory everything in your district which is called a community asset. What is a community asset? Where are the good schools in your district? Where are the parks? Where are the transportation hubs? Where are the employment opportunities in the business district? And if all of that is not equidistant from all of the different demographic and economic groups in your jurisdiction, including the people that you would bring in from other parts of the metropolitan area, then you're also in trouble, and you have to develop a plan to fix that. So that's the gist. There's a lot more, as I said, with regard to forcing you into a regional governing consortium. Maybe you'll be sued because you filled out the form in a way that was not very smart. So those are some of the main traps that are laid for almost any jurisdiction, especially suburban jurisdiction, that applies for a HUD grant under AFFH as created by Obama-Biden administration.
This almost reads like Thomas More's, or sounds like Thomas More's book Utopia, in which they create these communities, and at some point they tell you what uniforms you're supposed to be wearing, and who attends lunch and what hour, and dinner and what hour. I mean, this is such a massive assault on individual liberty, on mobility, on private property rights, on our local zoning system. It destroys our history in every respect when it comes to our governing system. And it all of a sudden turns everything over to bureaucrats at HUD who are, let's be honest, they are motivated by a radical left-wing agenda. So you'll basically wipe out the suburbs, you'll wipe out the ability for local governments to govern. And let's say you have somebody or some group, a town council and a mayor who say, we're not going to go along with this. What's the punishment if they don't go along with it?
All right, that is, in a way, the million-dollar question. The first thing a suburb could do if it didn't want to go along with this is just not apply for the HUD grants. Many, really most local jurisdictions in the United States receive what are called community development block grants from HUD. So you could say, okay, I'm not going to apply for it. And that would be smart. Okay, you'd be giving up the money, but you also wouldn't be filling out the form, which could get you sued. But here's where Joe Biden and the turbocharging comes in. It's bad enough that Biden has promised to enforce the Obama-Biden AFFH to the hilt. But now he's come up with a new idea that he got from Senator Cory Booker. And the new idea is this. Not only will your HUD grants become conditional on doing all of the things that I just explained, but now your suburb will not be able to participate in any state road repairs that use any money in what are called surface transportation grants from the federal government. Now, what suburb in the United States could afford to exempt itself from state road repairs? Its roads would deteriorate, or if they're going to build a new artery to help the commute, how could you not have an outlet from that artery into your jurisdiction? It would be impossible. So once the Obama-Biden AFFH is turbocharged with the Booker plan, I think every suburb in the country is going to have to capitulate.
It's so amazing, and I bet it would even expand beyond that. I bet they would try to go to court and cut off all or most federal grants, whether it's for education, whatever it is, try and tie it back and then get it in front of an Obama judge or even a Biden judge, should God forbid he win. And all that seems to happen is the trajectory goes one way. You have Donald Trump has become president, who hits the brakes and says, this is crazy, this is not what America's about, this is a violation of our constitutional construct, individual liberty, individual choices, and I'm not going to put up with it. And then you have the other party, which is absolutely focused on the government control of the individual, federal government control of our school systems, federal government control, more than that, of health care, federal government control of the employment and the workplace, and on and on and on. But I want to expand with you when we come back, Stanley Kurtz, the turbocharged part of what Biden plans to do. And then I want to ask you, why are they so quiet about it? We'll be right back.
Orders, I'm going.
Welcome back. Stanley Kurtz, you talk about how Biden really wants to intensify or expand what the Obama-Biden plan was by borrowing from Cory Booker, who says, hey, we can cut off more funds of that. Let's cut off effectively road funds. And of course, the suburbs need road funds because they're the suburbs and a lot of people drive and there's not a lot of public transportation and so forth and so on. So this would affect the suburbs a great deal. Plus, people in the suburbs are paying an awful lot of the federal tax load, and that means that they get very little back, certainly in terms of the roads when it comes. So the goal is for the federal government to compel compliance or to take money away from the suburbs that the suburbs have every right to receive because they pay into the federal till. So my question to you is, given how massively significant this is to the nature of the country, to millions of people who live in the suburbs and millions more who want to live in the suburbs, which are quite diverse, more diverse than ever before in American history, why is it so quiet? Why doesn't the media report it? Why isn't this on the front page of the New York Times and the Washington Post?
Well, that is a great question, Mark, and at one level the answer is blindingly simple. They don't talk about it because they understand perfectly well that all the things I've been describing would completely put off suburban voters. And suburban voters are the voters that both Democrats and Republicans are trying to appeal to. So what they've done instead, and by the way you should handle this if you really believe in the policy, is to pass a law. You remember passing a law? You remember civics?
Yeah.
You go before the American public and you say, well, here's what we want to do and here's why we want to do it. Now let's have a national debate and pass a law. But instead, it is the habit of the Democratic Party to take a law and really invent meanings in little obscure clauses that were never there and create a massive bureaucratic rule that doesn't have to be publicized in the way that a law would be debated. It's a backdoor strategy. It's very characteristic of the Democrats. And that's very much what's going on here, Mark. But there's more to it as well. There was a national debate of sorts, at least the beginnings of one, over so-called sprawl in the late 90s. And there was a Time magazine issue with a brawl over sprawl. And at that time, a lot of the community organizers that Obama worked with and a lot of left-leaning groups affiliated with the Democratic Party were attacking the suburbs with proposals very much like what we find in AFFH. And time and again, we saw the same pattern. And by the way, this is something I lay out in my book, the history of it. And the pattern is this. These left-wing groups would come in with their proposals, and they would find sympathetic state legislators who would hold hearings, and there would be protests. But as soon as people got a load of what was actually in these proposals for the suburbs, they were horrified and they backed off. Even the liberals. And they said, well, this is very radical. This is not going to win. And not only that, it's going to polarize the country, and it's just flat a terrible idea, which is based on hostility to the suburbs. And at that point, the greatest advocates of the kind of changes we see in the AFFH rule, they went underground, so to speak, and then a bolt of lightning hit, and one of their members became president of the United States, and lo and behold, they were able to run the whole policy menu as a kind of backdoor bureaucratic game.
And I think you're right. The reason the media do not focus on this is because it's really a Praetorian Guard media for Biden and his agenda and the Democrat Party. They know what he has in mind when it comes to the suburbs. They know what Obama started in Westchester, which we'll get to in a little later. And they also know that Biden needs the suburbs to win. Again, they keep talking about the women in the suburbs will make the determination of who's president of the United States. And if the women in the suburbs know what's going to happen to their homes, to their communities, to their schools, if they know what's going to happen, that they'll have absolutely no control over it, since all this power will have been devoured from the locality to the centralized federal government, the bureaucracy, where they'll have absolutely no say, the women of the suburbs may focus less on presidential tweets and more on Biden policy. Isn't that the real reason they're covering this up?
Absolutely, Mark. Absolutely. If this were known, they would lose. It's pretty straightforward. So instead, you know, they cry racism when that's really not what's going on here. And I think we'll get into that more when we talk about Westchester.
And in fact, Stanley Kurtz, you and I will at some point be accused of raising this to create fear among white people, which is exactly why I explained at the opening of this program how diverse the American suburbs actually are. They're extraordinarily diverse, much more diverse than the cities, as a matter of fact, and I would argue much more diverse than the Democrat Party when you look at the United States Senate, when they get 90% of the African-American vote, and they have 2 black senators in the United States Senate. We'll be right back.